Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our first information session, or ALA Insights. Today, we will be looking at the hidden world of sensitive species data. Thank you all for joining. My name is Juliette Sears, and I'm the ALA's Training and Outreach Coordinator who will be hosting this session. I'm joining from the land of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nations in Melbourne. Now, we are geographically spread out today as our lovely speakers, who I'll introduce you to shortly, are both on Ngunnawal country in Canberra, but we do all stand on beautiful country that has been cared for and managed by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples for millennia. They are our nation's first scientists, and as traditional custodians of this land, they have and continue to provide invaluable knowledge about their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationship with the land. This wisdom and the contributions of the elders are acknowledged, as are their descendants who are with us today. So this is a new format of webinar that we're trialling to give our users the opportunity to dive deeper into topics that we tend to get a lot of questions about. So today we have Cameron Slatyer and Tanya Leahy presenting from the ALA. Tanya and Cam both work on the National Restricted Access Species Data Project, and both of them have long careers managing species data within government. Today, they're going to cover what sensitive species are, what some of the reasons are for calling species data sensitive, how you will find whether data is sensitive in the ALA, and how you request access to data that has been generalised or withheld if you have a need to. So with that all said, let's get started. I'll hand over to you guys, and after the presentation, we'll work through some questions with the audience. We do have some poll questions in the chat function today, so please have a look at the poll and answer it if you can. But for now, I'll hand over to you, Cam and Tanya.
Thanks, Juliette, and good afternoon, everybody. We're here this afternoon to talk about sensitive species data, or as we hope to convince you all by the end of our chat, what we call restricted access species data. If we go to the next. So just to kick off, sensitive species, we'll start by explaining what we mean. So sensitive species data are data about species where there are reasons for either not sharing or modifying the record before making the data public. That can be anything from withholding species data on defence sites because the managers are worried about trespassers being blown up, right up to protecting a rare orchid only known from a few square metres. So why are sensitive species an issue? We'll take the Gouldian finch as an example. Years ago, Gouldian finches were hunted legally for the pet trade in Australia, but also illegally. They generally aren't today because they're a very, very common pet bird right across the world. But they're still regarded as sensitive in both Western Australia and Queensland, as well as by BirdLife Australia. This affects about a quarter of all Gouldian records in Australia. So to get access to sensitive records, you would need to approach around about 15 major data sources to get access, which is a pain if you're a researcher and potentially disastrous if you were doing environmental assessment on a short timeline. We'll be talking a lot about generalisation. So generalisation is where you change the latitude and longitude of an observation to hide where it was originally. This picture shows a common method used in Australia. By removing decimal minutes and seconds from an observation, the location of a record basically moves into a grid pattern. And this is a method used by ALA in most states and territory atlases. And you can see in the picture that you're looking at now what the impact is. So on the left hand of the screen in South Australia, the species is regarded as sensitive and it's being gridded by removing decimal minute seconds. On the right, the species isn't sensitive and it has a much more measly or chickenpoxy type approach. Over to you, Tanya.
Thanks, Cam. So there is a bit of confusion a lot of the time about what is sensitive and what is threatened and what the differences are. And there is overlap. However, sensitive species are those that are rare or even sometimes common species whose appearance, management, value, habits, the cultural significance or invasiveness make their locality information high risk if they're shared in the public sector. Sensitive species can also include biosecurity species, which have not yet been recorded in the country or in a region, and so prior to verifying their presence, a record, if disclosed publicly, could affect trade with other countries. Most states and territories and some third-party data providers maintain lists of sensitive species. Threatened species, on the other hand, are purely those species listed as threatened under state, territory, or Commonwealth legislation. So some examples I've shown here, they've got the koala down the bottom. It's listed as threatened in 3 states, New South Wales, Victoria and ACT, but it's only considered sensitive in 1. So it's only sensitive in ACT. The Queensland whistling tarantula on the top left, it's not listed as threatened in any jurisdiction, but it's considered sensitive in Queensland. And then the bushstone curlew, top right, is not considered sensitive in any jurisdiction, but it's listed as threatened in 3, in South Australia, Victoria and New South Wales. Yeah.
So reasons why species might be sensitive. The national framework we've been working on identifies a standard group of reasons why species might be labelled as sensitive. And the reasons that you can see on the screen are basically all the reasons why a species might be regarded as sensitive from various perspectives. By coming up with a national framework that actually defines a standard group of reasons, it helps both experts and users to understand why a particular record has been withheld or generalised. In summary, the main for all these reasons that are up on the screen, the major categories are, firstly, personal identifiable information, where the data contains names or personal details about an individual and the individual has not consented to make the information public. Indigenous data, there are a whole range of reasons why data might be sensitive to First Nations people, from cultural sensitivities around sites to the importance of particular species within a culture. The framework tries to act consistently with the CARE principles, which are principles intended to recognise Indigenous data sovereignty. Usage restricted categories, this is where a person or group providing the data has placed restrictions on it. And a really classic example would be a student may not want to make public species data used in their research until after their PhD has been conferred. And lastly, species-related categories. And these are what most people think of as sensitive species data, where an observation or information about that observation is sensitive because the organism might be disturbed or poached or for other reasons. The best example that most people are familiar with is the Wollemi pine, which is a highly sensitive species, and knowledge of its exact coordinates are only retained by a few people and are not shared at all. But another good example might be an observation of a powerful owl that mentions in the remarks the location of its nesting tree. Now, that location of the nesting tree might be sensitive, but the observation itself might not be. And we're currently heading an international working group that actually intends to take this standardised approach and apply it internationally. And the working group has basically agreed that to a standard set of criteria that are largely similar to the criteria that we use in the national framework. Tanya, back to you.
Thanks, Cam. So there's also several reasons that taxa or species might not be considered to be sensitive. And so the intent of the restricted access species framework is to minimise the number of species that are identified as restricted, so that we can maximise the number of records that are publicly available for decision making. One of the first reasons for not listing a species as sensitive is if the data is already freely available on a public database or website. For example, if all the locations for a restricted species are published in a scientific paper and it's an open access paper, then there's really no point in restricting the records of those species because they're already in the public arena. A species might be low risk in terms of its life history stages. So there are many threatened species where while the species is at risk from processes such as land clearing, the individuals of that species are not really vulnerable to issues such as poaching. Another reason for not listing as sensitive is that if a species is difficult to find or identify, it will be assessed as low risk. For example, you might have a wide-ranging species where even though there are localities listed for the species, there's a low probability of the species being at the same point at a second time. The fourth one and last one is if a species is assessed as being at comparatively low risk of poaching, the vast majority of the records or species are not attractive to poaching and are not likely to result in high demand. To you, Ken.
Thanks, Tanya. So we're now going to start drilling into how this idea of sensitive records manifests at a practical level. So within the ALA, how do we manage sensitive records? Well, we basically use exactly a similar approach to each of the states and territories. And what we actually do is apply the sensitive species lists used by each state and territory in Australia and apply that to all data in that particular state and territory. For BirdLife data, we've also got the BirdLife sensitive species list, and we apply that routinely to all BirdLife data in the ALA. So how does that work? Well, a generalisation level is set for each species. The latitude and longitude, as we explained at the start, are reduced by 1 or 2 decimal places, depending on how sensitive the species is. And then those lists are applied to all observations of taxa within the given jurisdiction. In most instances, other attributes may also be generalised, particularly remarks fields, locality fields, and personal information fields, because those tend to be the fields that hold information that might otherwise enable a user with ill intent to target a record. And lastly, records that have been generalised are flagged within the ALA with a note to say that the record has been generalised. Only generalised records are available via the ALA. We do have ungeneralised versions of the data available to a subset of users, but even if you're logged in, you will only see the generalised records as users. Back to you, Tanya.
Thanks, Cam. So we're going to go through a bit of a demonstration. I apologise in advance if it's a bit quick, but we're on a sort of tight schedule, and we want to show you a lot of different things. So I'm going to show you how to find sensitive species lists in the ALA, particularly the ones that we apply to the occurrence records. Also show you what a sensitive species record looks like in the ALA, both visually and what the content of the record looks like and how you can determine whether it's been generalised or not. And then also how to identify records that have been generalised in downloads from the ALA. And lastly, just give you a quick overview of how the restricted access species data request service works and how you can use that. So I'll just try and switch screens. Hopefully it will work fine. So on the ALA's homepage, you can click on contribute and upload a species list. It just says upload, but it will give you a list of all the species lists in the ALA. So that will take you to this page. Or will take you to a page, a list of all species. To identify which ones are sensitive, I've already selected them here, but you can click on this sensitive data service here, and they're the lists that we use for sensitive, to apply sensitive species to our records in the ALA. So it will give you a subset of those. You can see there's jurisdictional lists, there's a New Zealand one, and there's also one from BirdLife Australia here. So we're going to use the South Australian sensitive species list today. So if I clicked on that, it would take me to this South Australian list, and you can search here in this search bar for either on common name or scientific name. So I'm going to search for yellow I'm just going to type in yellow. I want to find the yellow-tailed black cockatoo. So if I type in yellow there and go find species, it will take me to a subset of the species on that list. And this is a species I'm interested in here, which is yellow-tailed black cockatoo. If I click on the scientific name, it will open up the species page in the ALA for that species, which is this one. As you can see, it shows a map, a distribution provided by one of our the federal government. And then here you'll see, if you scroll down, you'll see which lists that it occurs on. So you can see from this that it only occurs on the South Australian sensitive species list because there's no other list coming up here. It'll tell you, for this one, it tells you the generalisation is to 10 kilometres and it gives you a category, which is the South Australian category, sensitivity category. So then if I want to look at records of that species, I click on view and download occurrence records, which then will take me to this page. And here I can look at the records themselves, click on a map, and again, it's a similar map. If I click on one of the records, it will come up with this screen view record. So if I just want to look at an individual record, it will take me to that individual record. So how you work out whether this record has been generalised or not, there's a couple of things that will show you. There's this data generalisations attribute here that will come up, and it tells you that it's the record is sensitive in South Australia and what category, and it's how it's generalised. In addition to that, if you scroll down to the location information, you can see that the latitude and longitude have been truncated to 1 decimal place. And then also down here, it says coordinates generalised, and it will tell you why things have been generalised and under what authority and to what degree. So that's those things there. Apologies for going so quickly. And then if we want to download the records for that species, we'll go on this occurrence record search. We click on download. And there's a couple of ways that you can download or formats that you can download the record in. You will either, here we'll just demonstrate full Darwin Core and ALA legacy format, because they differ in the columns that they return and the way that sensitive species is shown. So I'll just show you. I'm in trouble with my mouse when I do this. Go this way. Yep. All right. I'll show you what the downloads look like. First of all, we'll look at full Darwin Core, which is this one. So as you can see, the terms or the column headings aren't really all that, they kind of look quite technical and sometimes they're not all that user-friendly. But this is the column here that you're looking for. It's about halfway along. You see there's like lots and lots and lots of columns that return in this, but the one you're looking for is this one. It's data generalizations. And here, I mean, I've highlighted the column. It doesn't come in this color, obviously, but when I can filter by that and see which records in this download have been generalized. The other format is the ALA legacy format, and that's this one. It's slightly different. You can see here that the column names actually make more sense to a human reader. And then for this download type, the field that you're looking for to understand whether something's been generalised or not is at the end or very close to the end. And it's called data generalised during processing, because that's saying that we apply that generalisation to the data. The next thing I want to show you, let's close those. The next thing I want to show you is the restricted access species data service. So this is the front page for it. What it does is it facilitates the data request process for restricted access species data. both enables the people to register and organisations to register as data providers or data requesters. Data requesters can then fill out a request, search for and fill out a request form for data from the data service, and it will be automatically workflowed to the data providers to action that request. So if you click on search, it will take you to the metadata for data sets that are listed on the data service. If you are a registered user and you logged in, you can do searches and select data that you might be interested in. You have to fill in quite a little bit of a detailed form to let the data providers know why you want the data, what you're using it for, how you'll hold it, and all those sort of things to give them assurance that the data would be handled correctly. And then if you've got multiple data sets, that data requested only has to be filled out once, and it will be forwarded to all the data providers that you've selected data sets for, and then they can workflow that through their systems. So it helps you in that you can just put in one request for multiple data sets. You don't have to go to several different institutions to request data. It helps the data providers to know that you reduces the number of requests that they get from multiple people from the same organisation for the same data. So that's it for the demo, and I'll start doing my presentation again. Cam.
Thanks, Tanya. Oops. So we were going to go on a slight tangent and just quickly talk about iNaturalist, because we're aware a lot of users out there who use the ALA but also use iNaturalist are contributing data via iNaturalist. And this is a particular issue where a lot of records get withheld by iNaturalist because of what users are selecting when they make the record. So just to clarify for users in case you're not aware, if you want your record to be used in research, environmental assessment, and all the other possible uses made in data in either ALA or indeed in GBIF, if you look at the centre of the screen, just under the map, and the little tag that says change geo-privacy, that defaults to open. A lot of people choose private. If you select private, no one other than yourself can use that data. And that's a really important distinction to make, because many people think that all they're doing is withholding the data from general access. They're withholding their data from all access. If you select obscured, the data gets obscured in iNaturalist, but if it comes through to us, we're still able to pass the data on to for research or environmental assessment purposes. If you select open, if it is a sensitive species, it will still get obfuscated. That is because we provide all of the state and territory sensitive species lists to iNaturalist, and they obfuscate data based on generalised data based on those lists. It is also available for scientific and decision-making purposes. Another note while I'm on the topic is if you make your record copyright, it similarly is not passable to other people. It is possible to make a record and just make the image copyrightable rather than the entire record copyrightable, and we strongly encourage people to do that, because surely a major reason for making observations in iNaturalist is actually contributing to the conservation and understanding of species. Back to you, Tanya.
I'll just quickly go through how to add a species to a list, a sensitive list. So this is if you've found out that there's a species that you think should be sensitive and it isn't listed on any state or territory lists or the BirdLife list or other lists that we have that we apply, and you think it should be. You need to check if your reasons for adding that species to the list fall within those mentioned in the framework and what Cam has talked about previously. Determine which state or territory the species occurs within. you'll need to provide good reasons in your documentation for wanting to add that species to the list. And then you can either contact the jurisdiction or the ALA and provide your reasons for sensitive listing, and we can help you by contacting the relevant jurisdictional representatives to facilitate your request being assessed. You will get the outcome of that assessment, whether it's positive or negative, and the reasons why or why not it wasn't added to the list. And last of all, again.
Thanks, Tanya. We mentioned right at the start sensitive versus restricted access species data. Most organisations today in Australia refer to sensitive species. In fact, most organisations on the planet refer to sensitive species. It's a really problematic phrase because people tend to get confused between sensitive species and threatened species. They also tend to conflate sensitive species with government security classifications, which quite often have a sensitive category within them. During the development of the national framework, we agreed across Australia that we needed to move towards a new term, restricted access species data, which is much more about describing what is happening to the species, to the data, rather than kind of making a value statement about the species. So increasingly over the next few years, the general language in Australia will move towards restricted access species data. As part of our work in the international framework, the international standard with our international working group, it's similarly been agreed at international level that it is probably an overdue change to actually shift away from the use of the word sensitive and move towards restricted access species data as a description of what is actually happening to the data. And lastly, if you're interested in learning more about restricted access species data, the framework, and indeed accessing the data service, you can do that by visiting the URL www.rasd.org.au. Don't forget the AU, otherwise it takes you to some weirdo American site that has nothing to do with restricted access species data. And on that note, we will pass back to you, Juliet.
Cool. Thanks so much. We've got a couple of questions coming through, but before I dive into them, I'll just ask one that I know we get asked quite often. So when a record is sensitive, as you've explained, the location is publicly displayed in a way that it's less precise. So how do you recommend people who don't have access to the restricted access species data service make sure they can capture all of the relevant data when they're doing a spatial query on the ALA so that they can make sure they're not missing any of these important data points for sensitive species?
Thanks, Juliet. I'll take this one if that's all right. Look, for the vast majority of users, you can basically use the data that's been generalised. It doesn't actually make a great deal of difference to the vast majority of users. But if you're concerned about what's occurring in or out of an area, the easiest way of doing it, and what I do myself, is if you recognise that most species in Australia are generalised at a 1 kilometre generalisation or a 10-kilometre generalisation. Varies a bit between jurisdictions and locations and which species you're talking about. If you actually put a buffer of a couple of kilometres around a site, you are pretty much very likely to pick up any buffered species records or generalised species records around your area of interest. If you want to be really certain, I'd suggest a 5 kilometre buffer around a site, particularly if it's a smaller site. But also be aware that if you're using the actual boundary of your site, there's a fair chance you are going to pick up generalised records from the surrounding area that will appear to be in your site, but may not actually occur in your site. That doesn't necessarily mean that the species doesn't occur there, but you have to, when you're doing any kind of species list, it always pays to check whether or not any of the records are generalised so that you know which species records may have a degree of uncertainty around them.
Perfect. Now I have one that's very similar, and I know we demonstrate how to do this in some of our other sessions, Cam, so this might be another one for you, sorry. But Lynn has asked, can you search for all sightings of a species in a particular location? She's given the example of lat long, but I'm thinking this might be like a radius query with once you've searched a species. If you had the yellow-tailed black cockatoo example up, you might be able to demo it.
Sure.
Possibly. Tanya's just working hard to make that kind of appear. Look, it's pretty. So sorry, Julia, just clarifying. That's all of records within a radius. Was that the?
So Lynn said lat long, but I don't believe we can search by lat long. But you can search for a species, and then you could within the map do a radius. I was thinking, so that might be useful for her use case.
I might have to reconnect. Yes.
So the easiest way of doing it would be to, if you're interested in a species only query, if you go to let's just go to yellow-tailed black again. If you go to your species of interest and go to the tab for download and view records, and this might actually not be a good idea. Sorry, for some reason there seems to be a massive delay on the website today, so we might not be able to do a live demo. Just can it. So basically you go to the download and view records tab. On the map, what you can do is use the menu that is at the top left-hand corner of the map to select a circle, draw the circle on centred on the latitude and longitude of interest, and that will enable you to pick up all records within a specified radius that you can set using the circle that you're talking about. If you're interested in more than one species, by the way, sorry, Tanya is now going to demonstrate. So yeah, just draw a radius.
So you can look down the bottom here, you can see the lat long you're looking at, or you can just, so you can draw a circle, go to your lat long, do a radius. There you can see the radius is coming up. And then when ALA catches up,
it'll tell you how many records you've got.
It's saying viewing 1 of 5 occurrences, and then you can go view record and it'll show you all the records.
Now, Tanya, could you just go to home for a moment, please? So if you're interested in doing the same thing for all species, a really useful little shortcut is if you go to the home page and you click on, and don't do it because it'll freeze, but if you click on 51,000, the number of records in the ALA, that takes you to a display that shows all records in the ALA. And if you do the same operation, you'll basically get all records of the species within the polygon that you've selected. And it's just a useful way of quickly getting a list of species for a given radius around a point.
You can also go to this explore your area. I think you can put lat longs in here. Yes, you can put lat longs in here.
Oh, cool.
And it will return so you can put lat longs in here. You can specify a radius. Unfortunately, it only gives you up to 10k radius, but you can specify a radius there, and you go view all records. They'll appear on a map here, and it'll give you like some information about what species and higher like species groupings they are in. And then you can download the records or view them all, and you get taken back to that same page we showed you before, but it'll have those records in there.
Back to you, Juliet.
Cool.
So like this. Yeah.
Excellent. Sorry, I just clicked through that. All right. So next question is from Sam, and he's asked, on what grounds could someone request clearance to access sensitive species data?
So the intent is this. So currently, even before the framework, most requests get declined because you don't just go in and request data because you're interested in where a species occurs. So generally, most requests will be related to research, they'll be related to environmental assessment or something similar. When you actually log on to the restricted access species data service, it does actually give you a guided key to what kind of queries are appropriate for this sort of data, because the data is withheld for most states and territories in Australia have really minimised what they treat as sensitive species to species that are under a high degree of threat for whatever reason they've been put on the list. So the things that tend to be on there are things that get poached. So you have to provide really solid reasons why you need to access the data, and pretty solid reasons as to who you are as to why you should access the data. Because for example, in New South Wales, there's a species called, I'm trying to think of the common name, Hovliceverus bungaroides, which I think is a broad-headed snake, that's it, which is hotly sought after by snake enthusiasts. And in fact, most of the snakes in captivity have come from the wild from illegal poaching. So if you are asked to access Hovliceverus bungaroides and you're not obviously a researcher or associated with environmental assessment, you can probably expect your query is going to be declined for pretty obvious reasons. Because not because no one trusts you, but because it's very difficult to demonstrate the bona fide need to access records to a high degree of accuracy.
So the restricted access species data service, the request tool, it has one mandatory, or it has a couple of mandatory criteria, and one is that you are affiliated with an organisation with an ABN. I forgot to mention that. So, for instance, if you're a researcher affiliated with the university or school, we need to know, it gives more assurance to the data providers where you've come from. And if you can provide an ABN, your university email plus a more generic email for an organisation. Same goes for things like, environmental consultancies and things like that. So it'll help the data providers make a decision as to whether or not to allow you access to that data. And you have to provide information about the reasons why you're requesting it, what you're using it for, and how it'll be held. So that also helps them understand that.
So most importantly, having a legitimate reason, particularly if you're in research or environmental assessment, and having an ABN, it sounds like.
Yep.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you, guys. So let me see. Someone has said, this is an interesting one. So they've said, hello from Brisbane. There's an increasing amount of intensive localised survey for a particular sensitive species, which would skew distribution data. Is the ALA planning on handling that in a particular way, like a dedicated field to flag this?
That's an excellent question. It's actually something we're working on at the moment. So one of the actual limitations with the ALA, if you use it at the moment, there's I'm assuming most of you are familiar with the filter functions on each pages, but if you visit a species page, on the right-hand side of the screen, just above the map, if you're going to the tab for download species data, Tanya's going to bring it up, there's a series of filters, and when data comes into the ALA, there's basically a series of annotations that are made on data for particular reasons. One of those that try to help users perhaps filter the data according to common needs. One of those, so if you go to the data profile and go to ALA General. So automatically when you view a species page, the filters listed there are applied. One of the filters is exclude records that are environmental outliers. And what that does is a reverse jackknife on all of the data with the species. And so any records that are unaccountably a long way from other records will get filtered out of your data set. Where that becomes a problem is where you've got a species where you've got multiple records from one point and a scattering of species across the rest of the distribution range. So hypothetically, there might be a herbarium collection made at a particular point where there were 70 specimens taken and 70 records made, and over the rest of the range, there's only 12 records across the rest of the range. What will happen is the reverse jackknife will pick up those 12 records as being environmental outliers. So it's this is a recognised problem that we're currently working on to try to come up with a better statistical technique. So the short-term answer is to turn off that filter if it's affecting your records. The longer-term answer is we will just have better statistical techniques to filtering records.
So you can turn that off just by checking this button, or if you want to see all records regardless of whatever checks we put on them, you can just disable all data profiles, and that will give you all records for either the species or the query that you're asking.
And you can also hover over the eye icon if you want to learn more about what that data profile means. Okay, we've got another one here from Greg. How are aquatic species generalised when the real coordinate falls within a waterway and the generalised coordinate is in another connected waterway? So, i.e. the same hosting waterway.
Well, the bad news is they're generalised exactly the same way as everything else. So generally speaking, the only exotic species in the ALA that are generalised are one of two types. So the ALA maintains a list of high biosecurity threat species. So they're species that don't occur in Australia, but are on a watch list for entry to Australia. And so there's about 2,000 odd species in the ALA, which are there purely as biosecurity alerts. Now, records for a lot of those species are actually treated as sensitive purely because the records that are in the ALA are actually either from incursions that have been controlled and then removed, or they're historical museum records. The other sort of data that involves feral species or weeds where the data provider has been concerned for one reason or another that the record might adversely impact on a particular landholder. So the classic example would be deer. So, for example, in New South Wales, from certain data providers, deer records are generalised to a 10-kilometre grid. Now, the reason for that is we discovered that illegal bow hunters were using the ALA to target properties and trespass. Now, there's two reasons why they were being withheld. Firstly, it represents a threat to life and property for the people living on that property. But secondly, it's not helpful for illegal feral animal control to be conducted. It should be conducted via appropriate mechanisms. So really, after the long answer, the short answer is to my knowledge, there's no aquatic feral species in Australia that's currently being generalised. I'm happy to be corrected on that, but I'm pretty certain because I produced all the lists.
Okay, so I think you touched on this a little bit earlier, but this is also from Greg. Greg's asked, is RASD being adopted by others, especially data available on data.gov.au, if you know at all?
So the ALA participates in the national group of data providers that's convened across states and territories, which is the Australian Biodiversity Data Information Group, if I've got the acronym correct. There's a general move towards synthesising sensitive species data and sharing sensitive species data within government, but also trying to develop standard processes. So over the next 12 to 18 months, there's going to be a general movement towards firstly trying to share sensitive species data on a single list so that everybody can tell what's sensitive in what state and territories. But ultimately, there's plans to try to move towards common adoption of the term restricted access species data, but also try to work towards common policies and procedures in relation to those species. But at the moment, that is some way off.
So there's another question here that said, oh, where did it go? Oh, this was a collections question, I think, so really good for both of you. Rare plant species can sometimes be found where their collection number falls between the collection records of two common species. Do you have any comment on obfuscating collector numbers of sensitive species?
Oh, awesome question. Do you want to take this one?
Okay.
So yes, that's a recognised issue. So at the moment, there's no way of managing for that. We're trying to. This was actually picked up as a category of sensitive species when we were working on the framework, and it's actually the reason we're laughing is we've got a meeting of the international working group tonight, and this is actually one of the agenda items. Yes, we're aware of it. It's actually an issue from a range of perspectives. The intention is to try to in future have a category that actually picks up records of those nature. What it basically means would be that we will have to obfuscate not only the sensitive species, but the records of common species that were collected in a similar sequence to obfuscate everything. And there's more work that needs to be done to come up with a useful way of doing that can be applied generically by collections.
And also the same similar thing applies to survey data. So if you have survey information in there that where sensitive species were collected as part of a survey and you generalise only the sensitive species in it, you can work out pretty easily where they were collected if you have that survey information attributed to the non-sensitive species. So you can just go backwards and go, well, that was collected at the same site, so this is where it is. So that's one of the considerations that we're thinking about as well. So it's a similar scenario, but slightly different, only the collector ID and date probably identify the records, whereas survey date, survey ID or site ID might identify sensitive records.
It's probably a useful thing to say at this point because we have sort of zeroed in on restricted access species data. It's a really important central concept to the framework and to the way most states and territories and indeed most users internationally deal with restricted access species data. The idea is to shrink wrap as much as possible. Data is kind of useless if it's not available. And frankly, in Australia and internationally, far more problems come from withholding data than sharing it. So there are very good examples where sharing data is bad. There's the case of cave geckos in Southeast Asia that have all been wiped out because they were only known from one cave. They were very colourful, attractive geckos. The locations of the caves were published and the geckos were nearly wiped out by collectors. I can give you as an alternative viewpoint the fact that there are records from iNaturalist in Tasmania which were from swift parrot breeding areas. The records were not shareable and the trees were cut down. Now, so you've got restricted access species data is always a tension between the two. Making data available enables better environmental decision making and better research. Withholding data protects the species, and you've got to find a median between the two. And I personally think, by and large, in the vast majority of instances, we're better off sharing data than withholding it.
Thanks, Cam. Just being mindful, we have 5 minutes left. I'll just ask one last question, which is what happens if a species of biosecurity concern is uploaded onto INAT or the ALA? Are there any processes in place to forward this data to the Department of Agriculture?
Oh,
Yes.
yes.
Great.
So this is probably a good topic for a completely different seminar, but do you want to talk about it?
So one of our colleagues manages lists or gets lists from the relevant agencies for biosecurity, potential biosecurity species that they want to get alerts on where they are potential risks and they don't occur here in Australia yet. So what happens is we get the raw data, excluding the private data, from iNaturalist, and if one of those species on that list is picked up on the data we get from iNaturalist and other sources, it gets an alert gets sent, an email alert gets sent with the record from iNaturalist, a photo of it, so they can verify whether or not that species is actually the one that they were concerned about and investigate it before it's released publicly. Yeah.
And it works. It's actually picked up quite a number of records in the past since it's been operational in the last 18 months.
Yeah. But it's mostly iNaturalist because that's the sort of the highest volume of records that we get through really recently. And they're, yeah, it's good. It helps verify the records in iNaturalist, so it improves our data quality as well as helps in some way potentially protect our borders from biosecurity threats. But I don't know that we've picked anything up that's of great concern.
Great, thanks guys. We did have a lot of questions today and I wasn't able to get through all of them, but we are very happy to answer questions offline. So I think my colleague Kylie's probably put the support email in the chat, which is support@ala.org.au. So feel free to reach out and Cam or Tanya will probably directly respond to any of those questions. We really appreciate you all attending today and thank you so much for your time, Cam and Tanya. But yeah, thank you everyone. This was our first ALA Insights session. If you have any ideas for other sessions we could run, maybe send that to the support email too. Thanks. Bye.